Welcome, Peterson Academy friends. Today we're going to have a very fun, not controversial proposal at all about religion. Religion is a necessary myth. Given by Maria, she'll be our proposer. Parker will be the lead listener, alongside a new dialogos practitioner here, Thomas. I'm really excited to have this mix of personalities here and perspectives in this dialogue, and so we'll see where it takes us. And the host, myself, Khaden, I will be the scribe today. All right, Maria, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Looking forward to this. I'm going to just read off my proposal, and we'll go from there. So, from Carl Jung and his collective unconscious to Jonathan Haidt's righteous minds, there's a lot of discussion around the role that myths play in human life. Jung saw religious stories as expressions of psychological patterns that we all share, our collective unconscious. And Haidt argues that emotions come first, rationale comes second, and a lot of our moral intuitions come before our reasoning. These moral intuitions kind of become the maxims of religions and the instruction of how to live a good life. People like McGilchrist too, they show how our brain, at least like our right hemisphere, is oriented towards like patterns and relationships, meanings that bind us to the world outside of ourselves. And in many ways, through the right hemisphere is how we experience like the sacred, the mysterious. It's all part of that brain. Peterson too, in his recent lectures, said that God is what you put first, and that stories, fictions, they're abstractions that represent kind of a mode of the ideal, and one that we should all participate in. He said the greatest stories we abstract are out of myths. So it all seems to point to the idea that religions in general are part of a collective myth, and they've changed over time and across cultures, but they continue to offer people a framework for understanding the world, shaping morality, and perhaps grounding us in what it means to live a good life. So all in all, my proposal is that religions are necessary myths and part of our evolutionary heritage.
Yeah, I agree. Vocal gun.
Good.
So the first question I would ask is what, well, two questions. First, how would you define the word myth? And how would you, okay, and what do you mean by necessary? Mainly, do you come from a place of religion is a necessary myth from a condescending point of view? Like, yeah, these are false, but we need them so society doesn't collapse? Or a myth being I would say a foundational story, and necessary meaning this is it's a good thing. Like, if your proposal more leaning toward the positive or negative aspect?
I think, to make it a little complicated, I think it's a mix of both. I think they are stories that kind of describe this collective unconscious, kind of what Jung was saying. I don't necessarily think myths are factually true, but they are sort of a collective ideal. And so I would say they're necessary. In that way, it's something that we look to that helps us kind of figure out how to move forward in a good way in this complicated.
Okay. I have a controversial question jumping to my head. When you say religion, are you narrowing religion to just Christianity, or are you proposing that like Judaism and Islam, and like Hinduism and all religions are a necessary myth, or just Christianity? Because we are American, we all are Western centric, so when we say religion, we usually just mean Christianity and not others.
No, I think all religions come out of this need for us to explain and kind of ground our morality in something. So I would say all religions are
Okay.
necessary myths.
Okay, so I want more of an idea of myth, and you can take it from a more of a psychological, like unconscious, like Carl Jung and I need to read Jung more, but so this past weekend we all celebrated the myth of our founding myth, the myth of America, and we all agree that that historically happened, but it's so interesting because it happened so recently, but it has still transcended into the realm of myth. Especially the founding father, and even more especially George Washington. Like if you go to Washington D.C. to the Natural History Museum, you can see um, a fresco called the Apotheosis of Washington, where Washington is sitting in the heavens, surrounded by all the Greek and Roman gods. And you can even see a statue of Washington on a throne, wearing like a Roman toga, holding a sword. So the founding of even our nation is now has been mythologized, and there's been a movement recently trying to deconstruct all that and trying to tear down what they call American exceptionalism. And we most people have been pushing back on that. I guess I just want to talk more about um so how do you say the ordinary person participates in the myth of religion?
So, well, to kind of backtrack on what you were saying, I don't think
Yeah.
I think I would separate myth from the idea. I don't think there's a myth of our founding, the myth of our founding fathers. There is a factual what happened, right? And the founding fathers were Christian. They were participating, mostly Christian, but they had the values of I guess, the myth of religion.
Yeah.
But I think there's a separation between like the factual realities of what happened and what helped them kind of transcend the difficulties of the time, which is the values that come from religion.
Okay, but I want to push back on that. But we view the founding fathers as larger than life figures because they accomplished something that we ourselves have not and are and we view as mythical, really. Like founding a nation rebelling against its mother country and founding a nation at that time had never been done before. It was a really peculiar event. So we can look back and go, yeah, these people are larger than life. These are the dudes that created America. Whereas in their own time, they were probably just like, hey, we're just trying to do what needs to be done. But they have become mythological to us. They become larger than life to us. So they weren't going, oh yeah, we're part of a grand mythological story at their time, but now we can look back and every 4th of July we celebrate our founding myth, our founding story. It's become more than just historical fact for us. Same thing with World War II. World War II, that has become a founding story for the West in a way. We're still living in the shadow of World War II. So,
I think I would disagree with that. I think they became larger than life. I don't think the myth is. I think myths, maybe they're on their way to becoming a bigger myth. I think it's a big idea. Like we were saying, every year, especially this year, in the United States Independence Day, everyone says America is based on the idea of who we are, because we're not bounded, or they were not bounded by any one thing. I think myth is bigger than that.
Okay, then we'll have to go back and define myth again. How would you well, let's lay down a definition, because I think we're using the same words, maybe describe different ideas. I think we have a different understanding of what myth means.
Yeah.
So can you re-explain your definition of myth?
I think myths are abstractions, like bigger abstraction. Yeah, abstract ideas that communicate something true, but not factually true. They are part of our collective unconscious.
Okay.
And the way that we've used to humans, as long as we've been alive, we have used these ideas and myths to explain the world and kind of make our way through it.
Okay, I would actually, I think I think we're colliding here because we're coming from different models of understanding. I would tend to disagree. Well, maybe not disagree, but I view myths as more of a story, and that the believers of the myth participate in. Oh, okay. Thank you, Khaden. You helped me remember that. There is. I think what you're describing is mythology, where I'm using the word myth, and there is a difference. A myth is the myth is what I'm describing as a story that a family story that you participate in, and mythology is just the story when you stop participating in it. For example, Greek. When we talk about Greek mythology, back in the day, they would have rites and ritual to worship the gods, and every year during the coming of rain, they would ritually go and look for Persephone in the underworld to back bring back spring. But once that ritual participation died, the myth um um the myth faded away into mythology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say, like, I guess what I would say to that is the myths of the ancient Greeks, right? Were sort of their religions, their god, right?
Yeah.
They had many gods, so that was their civilization's myths. It transformed for us, right? But we're still participating in that myth. So in a different way. So modern religions are still part of that same sort of like myth to try to explain.
Yeah. Go your proposal, religion is a useful myth. The way I'm understanding it, religion is I would say religion is useful because it gives us something to participate in that allows us to ground us together and have that same sort of unconscious moral framework in order to help us participate in the world. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So I guess a little bit of my background and the reason I'm kind of wanting to think through this is I'm not, my family is Greek Orthodox, but I've not been, I've been pretty secular. I'm still secular, but I've always had this interest in religion. And I think there's times where I was more atheist. Right now, I would say agnostic. But there's something about religion, and there's like important parts of religion that if you look at religion and people that participate in religion, you see something there that is important and kind of helps people get on the right path. And so I've been thinking about what religion is. Is it true, factually true? Is it a myth, a story that we should believe in, or it's better for us to believe in. And I guess that's what the proposal is like. I don't think it is a factual truth,
Yeah.
but I think it is a myth that helps people get on the right path. So a necessary myth.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's good. Yeah. The way I understand myth and mythology and all that is okay. We have. I think it's helpful to not try to divide them into factually true or unfactually true, because I think there's a third way, which is called transcendental. It the transcendental is kind of that in between space where mythology and reality collide. For example, the idea of Atlantis or the global flood or that kind of narrative. Okay, for example, Tolkien was Tolkien lived in the in between stages of World War One between World War Two, in that day of constant chaos. And both him and his son had constant nightmares about Atlantis. The the flooding of a city. And that was the basis for his. I don't know if you guys know Lord of the Rings. I can talk about it as if it's common knowledge. Sorry,
I do not
but
know.
that's his base. That's his
Numenor
basis for.
drowns.
Yeah. That's his basis for the city of Numenor, the city blessed by the gods that got prideful and defied the gods and subsequently wiped out by a flood. Now, that the idea of Atlantis, that narrative, we don't have a factual hard evidence of this actually happened. But that kind of story, that motif, it gets literally on every culture on the face of the planet. That's when we get Noah's Ark. That's when literally that's so ingrained in our subconscious and human that it frankly doesn't matter if it's actually true or not, because it's real to us. That transcendental state is where religion kind of lies. Like, do you have something, Thomas?
I'm sorry?
What?
Oh, never mind. I thought I heard you say something.
Oh. No, I eventually I have lots to say, but I'm liking where you're going.
Okay, yeah. So, okay, you mentioned your family is Greek Orthodox, which I'm actually not. I really appreciate all the iconography and all the way they participate in their religion. But I had a really interesting. I was in Utah for the holiday visiting my family last Christmas, and Christmas, the holiday, was not on a Sunday. It was on, I think, on a weekday or a Saturday or somewhere. And so my family is Mormon, so they did not have church on Christmas. And it was Christmas Eve, and I was feeling kind of conflicted. I'm like, this is a religious holiday. We are, well, it's supposed to be anyway, and we are celebrating the birth of Christ. It feels kind of wrong to let the day go by and not participate in a religious ceremony. Like, and I've never felt that before. I've been happy with the secular aspect, but and so I went to the Catholic Church down the road at midnight because they were having midnight Christmas mass, and there were like 3 or 4 Mormon families there too. And I asked them like, "What are we all doing here?" And even they were just like, "Yeah, it just kind of felt strange not to go to church on Christmas." Like, because the different we're kind of seeing in our world today why people are flocking to religion, why even non-religious people are drawn toward the religious community, religious life, and we want something transcendental, something that binds us together as a community. Um, we want something to celebrate, because that is what ultimately religion and myth is about, is coming together to celebrate something. Like Jordan Peterson said, your guide, what you pay the most attention to, what you attend to the most. Jonathan Pajot talks about worship is what you worship is just attention.
Mhm.
Bishop Barron and Jonathan Pajot both give really good. Jonathan Pajot especially gives a really good symbology class about how everything points towards the higher good. So if we take a proposal, I'm going to break it down. Religion being the ritual, the act of worship, being a useful, necessary, good myth being the story that we gather around and participate in. I would definitely agree that, because what we are celebrating, even if what we are celebrating is worth celebrating. I know Jonathan Pajot was interviewed about the Exodus in particular, and people were arguing about, oh well, we don't have archaeological evidence that this didn't happen. His response like, so what? They like what? Like, yeah, so what? Well, um what's the actual story that it, hey, you're okay, dude. It's okay. Sorry. What's the actual story that's being transmitted through the Exodus myth, and why is that important? Why? Yeah, because that's what I have.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I guess that's where I struggle with. Like, I do think there's an element of there needs to be some sort of, in order to be a Christian, let's give Christianity.
Yeah.
You can't really be a Christian without believing in Christ, but there is like importance. So there's some level of truth in belief that you need to have in like the factuality of religion, which I don't think for me is there.
Yeah.
But I do think there is like myths kind of transcend, like you said, truth and objective reality. And all religions have these basic elements. I mean, they can be very different, but there are some universal truths that are important as we go on in life. And I think those are what show that there is some sort of religion may be the best way to participate in these necessary myths, necessary guiding lights for life. And I think so I guess that there's some sort of discord there, but yeah, I lost my train of thought of the rest.
Yeah, I gotta take. Oh, I gotta throw my dog out really quick. Thomas, do you have anything for Maria?
Yeah, I have plenty. I've been taking notes here myself. One thing I really loved in your proposal and I'm stealing it from you. So if you wish to exact copyright, we'll have to have Khaden handle the legal issues there. But you said the sacred and the serious, and that was a really profound statement for me. As far as my studies go, I'm soon to be pursuing a doctorate in practical theology, but I study global health, and I have an anthropology degree because I'm actually a bit of a deconstructionist. So I'm formerly a minister, and when I started asking questions and sort of exploring um, I think the two most important ontological questions that every human being has to wrestle with, which is who am I and why am I here? My sect of religion that I was participating in, and I've messaged Khaden about it privately, it wasn't sufficient. It left me lacking and wanting, and fundamentally, it was a branch of Christianity. And as we know, we have over 49,000 different denominations of Christianity worldwide. So even in the sphere of those who would wish to explore Christ, we don't really have census, right? So I really needed to, for my own mental health and the things that I was going through based off of, a lifetime being raised in the church, expanding outward and exploring, is this real? Because if I'm going to stake my livelihood on it, my greatest fear since I was a child was living a lie, and that's for a bunch of different reasons. And so the concept of truth has been so very important for me. And when I stumbled into Dr. Peterson's lectures, probably a few years after he started posting on YouTube, I want to say like 2013, 2014, he would always talk about the varying degrees of truth. And that's something that's really more pursued in psychology than, let's say, any of the other social sciences, obviously philosophy as well. But I think there are different degrees of truth, right, which form in a collective objective truth. I think in an eventuality in the pursuit of truth, there is an objective truth, like quote unquote, at the end of the tunnel. But I think that is probably the most important question. And so religion as myth is a great proposal because I think second-handedly, at least behind that, I hear Maria asking, what is true, right? I think that is actually the foundational question that you are proposing. And I don't see it coincidence that you've always had an affinity to religion despite wrestling with the quote unquote factual aspects of, let's say, the biblical corpus or the archaeology or the anthropology of, let's say, Greek Orthodox or specifically Christianity, which is your family's background, right? I think when you evaluate the validity of a statement like religion as myth, for me, is that myth true would be the next proper question. And I think that based on what we know of psychology and neuroscience, if it imposes real value, then I would say it is beyond real or overtly true. And the way Dr. Peterson describes it, he says the abstraction then becomes hyper real because it's speaking to a foundational intuitive principle that is within the human being, right? So despite being atheist and agnostic, and I tried to be atheist, but it didn't work for me. You've still felt this pull, this drawing to, let's perhaps say, the principles behind religion. Obviously, anyone who has had interaction with religion, we've all experienced hypocrisy of the individuals participating in religion, let's say, and that sort of skews perception as well. Like I recently read a poll stating that 42% of all atheists worldwide, which constitutes tens of millions of people, reject religion because of religious people, right? Because of their interactions with individuals that are participating in religion. But if you want to ask the mature question beyond pain, it would then be, well, is this person a proper representation of religion? And then the next question would be, should I explore religion for myself? Which I think everyone must. That's part of the thesis that I'm writing, that in fact the pinnacle of human evolutionary biology is found in finding a relationship with Jesus. That's part of my thesis. Because again, as Dr. Peterson describes, whether you want these truths to be top down, like illuminatory from the heavens, right, or bottom up, whether it be a biological byproduct of our neurological evolution as hominins, either way, it still makes it true, whether it's bottom up or top down, because again, you have to ask the question, what is true, right? So like in logic and mathematics now, before, let's say 200 years ago, it was evaluating propositions strictly as 0 or 1, binary, right? True or false. But now they have what's called many-valued logic, because we've encountered quantum mechanics, which forces you to deal with continuums and infinite value, right? And so even within the bounds of logic and mathematics, the definition of truth is continuously changing, right? Because there has to be range of truth values to represent vagueness or uncertainty, right? And in How to Plan Your Life, Dr. Peterson talks about how in history, the further back a story is, the older it most likely is. Like we assume, right, the biblical corpus is around 3,000 years old, but when he talks about the story of Cain and Abel, most likely it's actually beyond that, 50,000 or 60,000 years old. And part of my study is, anatomically equivalent humans, like as we are today, in terms of the fossil record, are about 300,000 years ago. That is also the first time in history on Earth, distinguishing us from other hominins, specifically, let's say, Neanderthals, which are the closest equivalent at that time, since we lived together and there was cross speciation between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. The difference between us and them in terms of survival capability was vast. If it was solely based off of Darwinian evolution and natural selection principles, the Neanderthal wins because they had massive skeletal structure in comparison to us. Their musculature was far more adaptable to the living environments at the time, right? And so there was a clear distinction, and not in terms of a biological leap, but in terms of truth and asking questions that emerged when Homo sapiens, or anatomically equivalent humans such as us now, appeared 300,000 years ago. It was the first time religion came into place. It was the first time art came into place. In fact, that is one of the greatest distinctions they make between a Neanderthal and a Homo sapien, is a Homo sapien was capable of creating art. But art has zero value when it comes to survival.
Mhm.
Right? There is no value for me to be able to draw a rose on a wall, let's say, for my capacity to slay an animal and bring it home to my cave and then make love to my beautiful wife to continue the species, right? The capacity for art or religion or myth, let's say, has no bearing on natural selective principles. So, but they exist. And so the fact that these things exist in some way or another, right, varied degree, makes them true. So even as a myth, it still holds truth value. And one of the studies that I've been really concentrating on recently is the neuroscience research on prayer, specifically Christian prayer. And there are thousands of studies now. Recently, the one that I'm focusing on is on PubMed Central, pmc.gov. It's entitled The Convergent Neuroscience of Christian Prayer. And we know now also, because of neurological study, that a deception or a lie actually, in a traditional sense, is taxing on your brain, because deception is neurologically demanding. It forces your prefrontal cortex to work harder by inhibiting the truth, managing stress, and then monitoring invented facts. Well, what this study in prayer does is it actually revealed that focused, regular prayer in the Christian sense, and as a slight deconstructionist and former minister, I use the word Christian only because it's familiar. I resent the term because of what I think it's become, but I do still love Jesus. That's the best way I can describe myself at this time. But anyway, so prayer, it alters brain activity and structure, but it stimulates the prefrontal cortex for better focus, emotional regulation. It reduces activity in the stress-inducing amygdala, which is the mammalian part of our brain that controls our survival, right? And triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, which results in tangible cognitive and mental health benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And oftentimes when I come into debate with some of my colleagues, because I work obviously in research, most of my colleagues are not theists like myself. Most of them are agnostic or atheist. And when I present them these papers, there's some cognitive dissonance that they have going on, because it's very compelling, number one, and it is done by third-party, non-biased scientists, people who are, in the traditional sense, searching for the truth. And so oftentimes what I find is that people who are atheists and agnostic tend to negate certain aspects of empirical evidence that would point to, let's say, as you were stating earlier, the factual aspects of the Bible. For example, I took 2 trips to Israel, Palestine, because some of my work involves studying ancient Near Eastern philosophy, and people who have, encountered my posts on the quad, that's kind of been like my thing, because I think in the West, we tend to flatten some of our conclusions, but in the ancient Near East, everything was considered far more dimensional, right? It wasn't just propositions A to A, B to B. It was A could also equal Z, throw in W plus F as well, right? And so when you see the biblical corpus as an interpretive continuum, right? In fact, infinity in the ancient Near East wasn't as we see infinity. Though in Western philosophy, we have our infinity symbol, which is like an inverted 8 that's elongated, and it's like this. But in the ancient Near East, and which would be where the authors of the Bible resided, lived, and thought and worshipped in, right? Infinity for them is more like a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this continuous, unbreaking interpretive continuum. And I think that points beautifully to the studies of psychological concepts of myth, because they're not just false stories. As you mentioned, Jung, he talks about the collective unconscious and archetypes, right? And so emerged from a shared layer of the unconscious mind in an ancient Near Eastern context, an unconscious collective, as we would be, is the same thing as a circle, right? And so when you start to understand the symbolism, the varying degrees of truth, the emerging empirical data, and how we've philosophized as human beings now for the last several thousand years, those 3 modes of meaning, I think, indicate far beyond that religion is true. And of course, as a bias towards, the biblical corpus and Jesus being what I think is the pinnacle of the interpretive continuum, the ultimate identity, the greatest hero, right? Because as he was described in the Bible as perfect, right, without error, but also perfect in the Greek is Teleios, which means whole or complete. And so when the Bible calls us to be like Christ, the Bible isn't calling us to be without error. That's not possible for us, right? but it's actually calling us to become whole and complete, which completely aligns with the narrative that the myth is a mirror of the mind. You mentioned Joseph Campbell earlier, right? He highlighted that myths serve psychological functions by guiding individuals through the stages of life and making sense of human feelings, that myth represents the structure of human consciousness itself rather than just historical events. And then, of course, when you look at constructed nature of reality, right, we don't experience anything in a vacuum. You know, when Dr. Peterson talks about aims and the importance of vision and understanding what you see, right, your perception of reality, cognitive and perceptual psychology, which Khaden will be able to expound to us very soon as he goes to take his cognitive neuroscience classes, right? But it demonstrates that we experience as reality is actively constructed by the brain's processing of sensory information, right? And so different brains, emotions, and motivations result in different constructed realities. That's why religion in the West is Christianity and religion in the East is Buddhism, right? Because it's a different brain. But the principal function of religion in the brain remains the same, right? And in Buddhist psychology, because there are psychologists who happen to be Buddhists, right? They frame our everyday perception of reality as an illusion completely, right? So they see nothing in the physical is real and only everything in the spiritual being real. So it's completely inverse to the West. They see not religion as a myth, but they see Earth and the physical realities that we are engaging with on a daily basis as the myth, right? And so when we understand and we do our utmost to observe religion across time and across diverse peoples, I think we can reasonably come to the conclusion, not blurring the line between empirical fact and subjective myth, but coming to a union synchronicity of sorts, stating that it is more real, or as Dr. Peterson would say, hyperreal. It is beyond physical reality because it speaks to the very functional and foundational principles that caused Maria to make her proposal today. Right. So
Yeah,
I think that would be my little salt and pepper on there.
that was wonderful. There's so much there. I heard that talk with Dr. Peterson that he said hyper truths, and I guess there's a distinction between factual truths and hyper truths. The way I related the hyper truths was with Jung's collective unconscious, right? And there is some hyper truth there. And part of the proposal, the myth, religion is a necessary myth in our evolutionary heritage. I think it did come from evolution, because as we were created, we've always had these myths, and as we've grown, this collective unconscious, I think, has all these hyper truths there, and out of these hyper truths come these myths, and these religions. I guess what I've been thinking as you've been talking about all this stuff, I wonder first, the prayer studies that you mentioned, those are really interesting. I'd love to read them, but I also wonder if there's any studies on meditation with that too, because I have heard that meditation does the same thing. And to me, that points to, from just the limited studies that I've read on meditation, it reduces stress. It creates kind of like the similar effects that you said on prayer. It kind of points to, for me, these necessary myths, because there are, and for me, again, it does point to like religions are our way of kind of delineating this hyper truth. So like there are some hyper truths in our collective unconscious that are throughout, that span, all space and time and all cultures, right? And the way that we kind of are able to sort through them is through these different religions that pop up everywhere in the world. And so meditation is like the Buddhist way, and even like secular person's way of having this similar effect that prayer does. And that kind of points to that there is some hyper truth. That not that religions, and I'm not trying to sound inflammatory here, but not that religions are wrong, but that they are in some way non-factual, but they are still the best way that we have to reach the hyper truths that help us along our way, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And you mentioned the East and West, the Eastern being more holistic and the West being more categorical, which I think also kind of Ian McGilchrist on The Master and His Emissary talked a lot about that. And it was just an interesting point because Eastern religions and Eastern culture as a whole thrives more, per what he was saying, in this like right hemispheric side of our brain that does make the connections and does have that connection with the sacred that outside ourselves. In Western culture doesn't have that. Yeah, I think yeah, I'll end there.
Oh, that's good. I will say that I can send into the group chat at least that specific paper that I was talking about, and there are dozens that I have printed that I still have to get to. But I wanted to clarify something. So alongside meditative research, because there is, for several different reasons that I think some are political, some are I would guess there are some biases as to why I think there aren't as many neurological studies on Christianity than there are on other forms of religion in the world. But that's another proposal another day, right? But so that specifically these tests use control groups that differentiated, let's say, Far Eastern meditation or traditional Hindu meditation, right, versus what they call now, it's an emerging field, neurotheology, which Andrew Newberg talks about that in a lot of detail. But neurotheology specifically is the type of prayer or meditation where you are inwardly conversing with a higher power. So versus traditional meditative practice is attempting to obtain silence, right? To enter into the stream of consciousness and to just exist and be fully present. You're not attempting to output anything. You're not attempting to input anything. You are just entering the stream, as it were. But this study specifically, side-to-side comparison on traditional meditation versus what they would call as neurotheology, praying using the words within your mind, right? Because when we think of a word, we see it in letters. And so having that dialogue with a higher power, and it was over an 8-week period. And the physical alteration of the brain of those who were participating in neurotheology, prayer to a higher power versus meditation, there were 5 to 10, even in one area, 15 percentile increase in emotional regulation and potentially increasing serotonin synthesis, which, if you're familiar with what's known as the gut-brain axis, transmitted through the vagal nerve, you understand that over 70% of the serotonin in your body is produced in your gut. And so that's why gut health is very important and all of that, because most of the time, and Dr. Peterson has talked about it in his practice, where some of his worst patients, all he had to do was change their diet and they were a different person 3 weeks later, right? Because when you have issues with the gut, serotonin production goes way down and all of that. But so it increased serotonin synthesis, which means the communication with the gut-brain axis and the transmission of serotonin, the happiness, chemical, went up. As opposed to meditative practice, it usually has a slight increase, and then it forms sort of a baseline. It brings everything sort of, you know, balanced, I guess would be the philosophical word for it. But that was why this study in particular was so profound, because it was one of the first studies done in the last, let's say, 65 years that differentiated the difference between what Christians call prayer and what, let's say, Far Eastern practitioners would call meditation. And that is why it was so compelling, and why we have, you know, absorbed it into part of our body of work that my team and I are doing, because again, it created that differentiation. Actually participating in dialogue with the higher power versus sitting in silence is more beneficial to the human brain than less. So not that meditation isn't beneficial, it is very, but neurotheology, dialogue with the higher power, showed increase in percentile. And even if the percentile was only 1%, right, we're talking about what's factually true, right, empirical evidence, then neurotheology is technically, based off of this study, right, it's not global census, but based off of this study, better, right, or more factually true than traditional meditative practice. And
Okay.
so I'll
Yeah.
definitely send that to you guys so you
Yeah.
can see it.
Thank you. So I wonder, what's making me, I wonder if there are more on different religions and prayers in those different religions. But I think I think we agree that there is this hyper truth, like the
Yes, of
God,
course.
what we call God is hyper truth. That's what we all aim to, and what helps us kind of live a good life. So I wonder if so there, you know, you said the your personal bias is the Bible and Christianity, and the concept of truth, this like um issue of, is it actually true, like can I believe in Christ? Like I wonder if there's a break, right, with we all agree on hyper truth, there's some sort of God, whatever we call God, or how we want to define the hyper truths as God, and then religions are just the way that we, our personal preferences, but maybe there's no, maybe those are the myths, right, the non-factual parts that get us to the truths, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I made any sense there. But
No, you're making sense. It's fine.
okay, because like, so why is it that the personal, for you, just like curious, what makes it the bias towards the Bible versus saying like there are hyper truths, there's a God that we all can kind of tell, that's shown in different religions in different ways, these truths, but it's not in any one specific religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't want to take up all the time. If Parker, if you want to.
Oh, I have something, but go. He just what you go. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think for myself personally, it's anecdotal, right? That is one of the problems with trying to empirically verify religious claims, is that oftentimes it comes down to the experience of the individual, right? And it's experiential. You know, Khaden has espoused greatly on his experience when he sort of left his former religion and started exploring in the world, and we share that similarly. But for me, I can say I formally was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I come from a very traumatic childhood and an abusive biological father, and part of what I had to endure was that he inserted me into a fundamentalist Christian cult when I was 10. And most of the suffering in my life actually has come at the hands of those who would deem themselves Christians, or followers of God, followers of Jesus. And my deconstruction was very taxing, despite my, and I'll use a religious phrase, relationship with God being mostly founded on pain and suffering. the only thing that I can say, the way that I can describe it, is that I knew what I was enduring at the hands of people who claimed to be his followers weren't true, because when I would read the Bible, the biblical account, the human beings, let's say, that are accounted to us through the biblical corpus, had completely different minds, lives, loves, behaviors, and character than the people that I was experiencing, right? So I had a direct, let's say, variable difference. If it was going to be a laboratory study, there would be an introduced variable, which is the people who I was experiencing versus the people that were described in the Bible. And then, of course, the amalgamation of the biblical corpus being Jesus. Not only did I, once I left, not only did I experience another religious phrase, shall we say, newness of life, all of the biological markers and things that could be measured in terms of my conditions decreased significantly. I've been in therapy since I was 9, and my therapist that I work with now, and he's also one of my mentors, he works in specifically what's called temperament theory. It's based off of the original Hippocrates' 4 models of temperament. But now it's been adopted by the National Christian Counselors Association, and they call it creation therapy, which is a whole other thing. But anyway, the measurable biological markers of stress induced upon my body and myself decreased when I removed myself. Obviously, it would be most beneficial for everyone to remove themselves from a cult, right? But there were measurable differences in my biology when I attempted to read the scriptures and attain a relationship with God on my own versus being attached to an organization. So that's why I would like to call myself a Christian, because I believe in following Christ, but I don't have any formal religious affiliation. I don't belong to a church. I don't, belong anywhere, right? I guess I belong in the ethos somewhere, right? My wife and I. But yeah, that was, and it actually happened, right? My blood pressure went down. My capacity to sleep increased. My appetite changed. My willingness to pursue meaning and utilize my gifts, talents, as it were, for the betterment of mankind happened, resulting from me deciding not to listen to people's and obtain, again, a religious phrase, a relationship with God for myself, right? And so in that way, I do have some empirical evidence. Now, obviously, if you measure my blood, the result on the Stractus that comes out of the printer doesn't say, yes, God exists, right? But it does show that when I engaged in, let's say, God differently than when it was dogmatic and in psychological and neurological terms, the absolute worst for condition for a human being to be in, versus the conditions in which a relationship with God is described in the Bible, which is based off of love and truth, identity and integrity, taking care of your physical body and your finances, right? Having purpose or vocation, right? The Bible espouses on individual talents and that you were created for a very specific reason, and that your story has utilization globally for a very specific reason, right? And that following Christ is not something that is just an escape from a proverbial fire of doom in, let's say, 60 years from now when I die. That no, Christ himself said that heaven was meant to be experienced now, right? And if heaven is paradise, well, then you would ask yourself, what is paradise for an individual? And that would be wholeness, right? The completion of who you are as an individual with your capacity to serve. So that would be my reason. I could go on for hours, but I see Parker chomping at the bit there.
Take it away.
I know you like Lewis. Are you familiar with his conversion story to Christianity?
Am I familiar with what?
C.S. Lewis's conversion story to Christianity?
Yeah, more or less, yes. He
Yeah,
was an atheist, and then
yeah,
yeah, he kind of fought against it, and then became Christian.
yeah.
Yeah.
He was actually talking with Tolkien on a walk. They both loved Old Norse myths, and Lewis was talking, kind of complaining to Tolkien, like, well, I don't get why you believe in Christ. Like the motif of a dying and resurrecting God everywhere, from Baldur to Osiris to yeah, everywhere. And Tolkien took like, yeah, but the difference between Christ and all the other gods, Christ actually happened. He was the fulfillment of everything that we love about all the myths. And that conversation is kind of what drove him to Christianity. There's a really good YouTube short clip between Jonathan Pageau and John Vervaeke, and kind of exploring the same idea of like Jonathan took like, oh well, like I always laugh when people took like, oh yeah, G could took a copy of such and such God, and my response like, what do you mean, all of them? Like, because like yeah, like you have the harvest God, you have the war God, you have the dying God, but Jesus is literally all of them. Like, and that was sort of unthinkable to the ancient. And what could this is anecdotal, but the reason why I believe in Christianity is because when I view all the mythological stories, all the myths, all the folklore, all the fairy tales that I love, I'm not looking like, oh, well, obviously this person is not Christian, he has not been baptized, he doesn't believe in all the creed, therefore this is false. I can go, hey, like, I can see the good and the moral and the beautiful and the true in this that I have because I'm Christian, and it makes all these things become beautiful to me. Um, Christianity is religion and Christianity in particular is a youthful myth to me because it is the lens, the prism that I view everything else by that causes everything else to become more beautiful, become more meaningful, become more good. Um and he man, what was the name? Thomas used the word telos, complete. Christianity take everything good around the world and make it more complete, more whole for me. Um, yeah, I don't have all the scientific evidence to back it up, but that is what it's done for me in my life.
Yeah. I think what's really cool is that every time I talk to people who are pretty religious or believe in Christianity, and I am agnostic, I think that is what's really cool is that we kind of both believe in the same thing. And I think that's what everyone who I think is trying to live a good life, and I get a lot of, I don't deny that a lot of the morality I've grown up in a Christian home comes from Christianity. But I also I read a lot of philosophy and C.S. Lewis, I read all these people, and everybody has this thing in common that the true, the good, and the beautiful, those are Christianity resembles a lot of what all of that is. And we all believe in these, like we said, hyper truths. And I think it points to the fact that there is this, I guess in my head again, like I've already said, this in this collective unconscious, and religions and Christianity are some of the best ways that we have to follow those truths and to have those truths as guiding lights. Where was I going with that? I keep losing my train of thought. I think what's really cool is that there is some sort of a hyper truth there, even if we can disagree with Christianity in specific, or any religion specifically being true in some way. I think there's something on top of it. I guess there's like what we were saying about layers of truth. Truth is a big thing for me too. There's this objective reality truth that we live in, truth of the ideas of like religions and philosophical ideas and concepts, and then like the hyper truths that are kind of surrounding us and surrounding our life in cultures and ages and things like that. So I think yeah, we agree on the hyper truths are real. I do think that religions are the best way to fulfill those hyper truths, not necessarily religions being the truths themselves, because everybody who is in a different religion believes their religion is the right one. But I do think that Christ, I think, can embody, I forget which one of you said it, but he embodies kind of like the completeness of all the other myths. You, Parker. And I see it as kind of like the evolution, right? Like we believed in multiple gods, then we believed in singular, and Christ came along, and he kind of, after all this time, he was put in this hole, right? And I find it interesting. I'm actually Greek. In Telos is the end, and Telio is perfect. So it's interesting how Teleios and Telos can be one and the same, like the perfect end, the perfect whole. That could be the archetype of Christ. Yeah. So I think we have some agreements.
Yeah.
There are
I
some
love
myths.
that. Yes,
Yeah.
I love that. I think one of the greatest things for me as well was, at least in my upbringing, I wasn't taught to attempt to read the Bible in its original languages. And when I started to study the Koine Greek and the ancient Hebrew for myself, because we have over 900 translations of the Bible into English, which one is true, right?
Right.
So when I started to study the Septuagint and the Tanakh and everything that came from source material, source language, you get a real understanding of what the authors meant when they wrote that. And oftentimes, when we transliterate into the Latin, into the English, we've lost, I would say at least 50% of original meaning. And so the fact that you were able to say that about your connection to the Greek, I think it's super important.
Yeah. All right. I think we came to a good, all of us kind of converge at the very end there. I think probably it's a good place to stop. How did you feel about that, dialogos?
It's great.
Amazing.
All right.
Okay.
I'm going to give a Scribe report. It's going to be very interesting because I noticed some things. When you're the Scribe, you notice things that percolate near the surface and kind of skirt there. And you can kind of see things that people are grasping towards, but they can't grab it in real time. So I'm going to try and just observe what I saw bubble up here. Really, really good dialogos. A lot of great arguments. First, start out with the dance between Maria and Parker here. You're working out and really trying to flesh out what myth is, what religion is, what it means to participate. A lot of it was clearing the definitions, clearing the weeds of misunderstanding, the semantic weeds. And I think a perspective Parker kept getting at was a myth is something you participate in. So there's a participatory aspect versus a mythology. And because there's a participatory aspect to myth that's going to, that has causal power, that affords something important. And that was kind of what you and Parker were reaching towards. Let me look at my notes here. that when you participate, a myth is a story you participate in that grounds the abstraction into your life, your community. Hence why Parker was reaching at the founding myth of our nation, or how it's become mythologized. We participate in that. We remember the founding story every time we celebrate the 4th of July. Just like Christians will remember Christ when they partake of the Eucharist, engage in various rituals, they're grounding the abstraction into making they're incarnating the abstraction via a ritual. All right, so it's important. And I love Thomas's thoughts here from his anthropological and theological perspective. Couple premises he laid out here is one of the things that religion addresses is who am I and how can I know? I think that's what you said. The 2 ontological questions.
Why am I here?
Why am I here? There we go. Thank you. Why am I here? I couldn't read my own handwriting. Who am I and why am I here? I write so fast on this. Another premise is, does it improve? Does it provide real value? And that kind of led to the conclusion, that there's a principle of affordance here. There's something that causes religion answers that question, and you ought to go on a religious journey because those are the 2 fundamental questions that are answered by religion. Who am I? Why am I here? That orients you into a story, orients you into that ultimate eternal circle, eternal round, that conception of truth, the ultimate truth. That's what grounds you in it. And what this is what really stood out to me in this dialogos. So that's what religion does for you. Is it brings you into that ultimate collective unconscious, you can call it. Where something pivoted in the dialogos, and it got me really thinking about the importance of having a true myth, and not just a true myth as in you're participating properly in the ultimate truth, that there could be different ways of participating with the truth. You and Thomas were talking about, and you're getting into neurological weeds here, about prayer. Thomas talked about, he compared and contrast the more neurotheology prayer, which involves having a dialogue with the higher power to converse with the Lord, you could call it, versus the Eastern form of worship or celebration or participation, which is the emptying of one's mind. Keep in mind that you brought up a question in your conversation with Thomas about the East and the West, how the East is more holistic, and that they connect with something outside themselves. That's why they're holistic, versus the West, which is more categorical. And you said that is not present. Then the question came into my mind: if they don't have that connecting with the collective holistic or the something outside the self, what is present in the Western myth? And I think it is something to do with stewardship, theosis. In the Greek Orthodox tradition, they call it theosis, where you can become like God. Where in the story of the Western conceptualization, or the early Christian, I think it's the early Christian conceptualization of religion, is you don't just dissolve into this this oneness with reality where you lose your identity. I think in the Christian understanding, there is a divinizing, a Christos of your identity, and you receive a new name and you become something new. So with that, the practices of both different religions, meditation, when you empty yourself, you are dissolving your ego, you're dissolving your identity, and you merge, you can say, holistically with the collective in that aspect. When you are going through the neurotheology, which is having a dialogue, and that type of practice, I love the research, 15th percentile increase of serotonin production. Serotonin is self-esteem. Pearson talks about loser lobsters versus winner lobsters. When you're a winner lobster, higher serotonin, you have self-esteem, you have stewardship. It's not an arrogance, but it's not just I'm dissolving into my work, but I have a responsibility over my arena, my microcosm. There's an expansion of consciousness because you're dialoguing, as opposed to the meditation, which may be a dissolution of consciousness. Nothing is empty. So that practice, you can see how there's two different practices there, two different ways of participating with the ultimate truth. One cultivates esteem, which it can go too far, it can become hubristic. You're too arrogant over your dominion. The other cultivates emptyingness, submission, nothingness. And so I think that's a question for Layer. Like, could those two different practices from the two traditions be participating in an ultimate truth in a different way? And would that then determine how that culture that practices that myth, what that culture does? Think about what the West has achieved in the last 500 years, centered on this mythos of Christ, versus what the East has produced, centered on this more collective myth. So back to okay, and so hold on a second. Okay, and then I really loved how Thomas brought that back again, and he shared his personal journey of deconstruction, and he talked about how he had all the neurological biomarkers. And he mentioned a few things in this journey. When you deconstruct, you had a newness of life. And I'm pretty sure some of those markers had to do with serotonin, better serotonin regulation. You also mentioned in your journey that you were reading the Bible in its original language. Those practices that you're engaging in answer the ontological question of who you are. And you learn who you are not by emptying yourself, perhaps, but by dialoguing. So when you are reading the Bible in the original Greek, instead of accepting a fundamentalist interpretation, not questioning it further, by that act of questioning, you are engaging in a transtemporal dialogue with the authors of Scripture. There's a dialogical aspect. Parker brought in the conversion of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. And Tolkien converted C.S. Lewis. Now, there were some good arguments there, but I think what really converted C.S. Lewis to Christianity was the act of dialogue. You said they went on long walks together and they walked around. That's the peripatetic form of learning that Aristotle and Plato and Socrates used in ancient Athens. Remember, that's a Western tradition where they would learn by walking around the Lyceum, engaging in dialogue. Because when you are dialoguing with someone, or you practice conversing with God or your higher self or the higher consciousness, the way you practice that is learning to dialogue with other people. That's one way. That's one route to it. John Vervaeke talks a lot about this. That's why he does the practice of diaLogos, which is what we're doing right now. And when you dialogue with other people, it expands your consciousness. You become more self-aware. You have a greater grip, and you, by the very act of dialoguing with God or dialoguing with other Christians or other people who are intelligent, you are participating in a myth that affirms the intelligence of other people. And it affirms that you have that capacity as well. So yeah, that was my Scribe. That's kind of what those aspects I noticed bubbled up, and I wanted to, when I get in my Scribe report, I wanted to highlight those aspects. So there it is. Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you. You gave me a lot of food for thought. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It was awesome. Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maria.
Can I throw one last thing in really quick based off
Go
of
ahead
your
and throw one last
analysis?
thing in.
So in the Gospels, we were talking about the difference between the East and the West. You actually see the convergence of prayer practice of both meditation and theological prayer in Jesus. The Gospels describe him as removing himself, going onto a mountain to be alone and pray. And we have in both the Gospels dialogical prayer between him and the Father, as it were, and prayer in silence or meditation, both. So I think that Christ actually encapsulates being perfect, both practices in one. There is a time for receiving in silence, as it were, and there is a time for participating in dialogue. And we see both of those practices being used to the utmost in Christ.
Amen. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for your time and attention, listeners in the future. Let's see.